The evening train had just vanished into the horizon, its last whistle drifting like a fading cry across the dusty plains, and the small wooden station stood half asleep beneath the bruised colors of dusk. A warm wind stirred the dirt, sending it swirling around the feet of Naira Willow, age 20, who stood barefoot on the platform with nothing but a frayed bundle pressed to her chest. The fading light caught in her dark hair, turning it almost copper for a fleeting second, as though the sun itself wanted to hold on to her before leaving her behind, yet even the sun could not stay with her tonight, and she felt the absence like a slow ache she wasn't ready to name. She took a careful breath, looking at the unfamiliar faces around her, hoping one, just one, might show mercy, and already her heart trembled in fear of what their eyes would decide next. "Please," she whispered to a passing woman in a frilled bonnet, "I only need shelter for a night." The woman halted, studied her with thin, tight lips, then stepped away without a word, almost as though kindness might stain her gloves. Naira turned to a pair of ranch hands, but they pretended not to hear her, their shoulders stiffening as they walked. Shame rose in Naira slowly, as steady and unwelcome as the cold creeping into her limbs, and she wondered how the world could feel so wide and yet hold no corner meant for her. She sat on the edge of a crate, her breath shaky, her dignity thinning with each passing refusal, and a tremor moved through her chest as she murmured to herself, "No one wants to give me shelter," while something unseen watched her from several paces away. The unseen gaze belonged to Eldrick Boone, age 30, a tall cowboy leaning near the water pump, his hat low over eyes that carried too many stories and not enough peace. He had the posture of a man accustomed to loneliness. Straight back, quiet stillness, hands that didn't fidget because they'd learned long ago there was no one left to fidget for. His light shirt clung to the shape of his shoulders, the sleeves rolled to his elbows, showing strong forearms darkened by sun and miles. He watched Naira with a heaviness he couldn't explain, as though her pain stirred something worn but living inside him. He shifted slightly, unsure if stepping forward would help or harm her, and an old question pressed at him. Why did fate always present him with moments requiring more courage than he believed he had? Eldrick took half a step in her direction, then paused when the sheriff strolled by, giving Naira a look thick with suspicion. "Town's full tonight," the sheriff muttered, though the street beyond was quiet and still. Naira lowered her gaze, hiding the sting in her eyes, and Eldrick felt an unfamiliar heat rise in his chest. He hadn't meant to get involved. He hadn't planned on feeling anything tonight except the usual tired emptiness. But something about the way the girl held her bundle, careful, protective, as though guarding the last soft thing in a hard world, fractured him in a place he thought long sealed. Still he hesitated, unsure if she'd trust a stranger, and even more unsure if he deserved to be the one offering anything at all. Naira tried to stand, but her legs wavered beneath her, exhaustion pulling at her like invisible hands. The benches at the station were rough and splintered, yet she sank onto one because sitting felt like the only thing she could still control. The cool boards pressed against her shoulders, reminding her how thin her dress had become after weeks of travel, and she closed her eyes for a moment to steady the spinning inside her head. She felt the sheriff's judgment like a cold shadow, felt the townsfolk's fear like barbed wire coiling around her heart, and she swallowed hard to keep the tears from betraying her. When she opened her eyes again, Eldrick was standing in front of her, not too close, not too far, holding out a tin cup filled with water, his voice low as a dusk breeze as he said, "You look like you've had a long road, if you want a moment's rest." She met his gaze, startled by the gentleness there, and her breath caught as she wondered why this stranger saw her differently from everyone else. Eldrick didn't speak more than necessary. He never had. But when Naira reached for the water with shaking fingers, something in him shifted, softening. He helped steady the cup, a small gesture, but one that felt intimate in a way that made the air between them hum with unspoken truths. The sun dipped behind the hills, and the shadows grew longer around them, drawing them into a quiet that didn't feel empty, only waiting. Eldrick nodded toward the horizon where the last streak of gold clung to the sky. "It'll get cold soon," he murmured. Ain't wise to stay out here with night coming on." She hesitated, unsure of his intention, unsure of herself, unsure of the stories this night might carve into her life. He studied her face, saw the fear she tried to hide, and something gentle flickered in his eyes as he added softly, "Come home with me, if you trust me enough for one night." And the world seemed to pause, waiting for her answer. The ride to his cabin took them through a quiet stretch of land where the wind carried the scent of sage and the moon cast its silver glow over everything it touched. Eldrick's horse moved with a gentle rhythm, and Naira sat behind him, holding onto his coat because he had insisted she stay warm. The steady thud of hooves matched the trembling beat in her chest, and somewhere along the trail she allowed her cheek to rest lightly against his back, surprise blooming inside her when he didn't flinch, as though he'd been waiting for her to trust him that much. He spoke little, but every word he offered carried sincerity. "I live simple," he said. "Cabin's small, but it's warm." She listened, comforted by the cadence of his voice, though a part of her still feared wearing out her welcome. When his cabin finally came into view, its windows glowing softly in the dark, she wondered how long that warmth would allow her to stay, and if she deserved it at all. Morning in town brought a different kind of cold. The moment Eldrick walked beside Naira down the dusty street, whispers rose like swarms of insects around them. Women exchanged glances sharp enough to cut. Men muttered under their breath, suspicion tightening their shoulders. A shopkeeper paused mid-gesture, studying Naira as if she were a threat rather than a tired girl looking for bread. Eldrick noticed her shrinking into herself, noticed the way her fingers twisted the hem of her dress in nervous knots, and he stepped closer, not touching, but close enough that anyone watching could see she wasn't alone. His presence shielded her like a steady wall against the world's ugliness, but the tension in the air gnawed at her confidence. One old man spat near their feet and muttered, "Strays shouldn't be kept." Naira inhaled sharply, her shame building like a rising tide, and she whispered to Eldrick, Maybe I should leave before I cause trouble for you," while the cowboy's jaw tightened with quiet defiance. Eldrick stopped walking, turned to face her fully, and spoke with a firmness that surprised even himself. "You're safe with me," he said. "No one here gets to decide your worth." His eyes held no hesitation, only a clear, quiet promise shaped by a life that had known too much silence and too little devotion. Naira looked up, unsure how to process the tenderness she found there, and something inside her softened in a way she hadn't allowed in years. She touched his hand lightly, barely a whisper of skin against skin, and the moment sent something warm unraveling inside both of them. Eldrick wanted to tell her that she had already taken root in him, that her presence filled places in him he'd thought long dead, but he swallowed the words, choosing instead the slower path of respect. He kept his hand near hers as they walked, not quite holding it, yet not letting the space widen either, and in that quiet, he made a silent decision he wasn't ready to speak aloud. That night, storms rolled over the plains like restless giants. Rain hammered the cabin roof as thunder shook the ground beneath them, rattling loose memories they had tried to bury. Naira jolted awake when lightning split the sky, her breath shallow, her fear unmasked. Eldrick rose from his cot and sat near her, offering a blanket and a dim lantern glow. "Storm won't hurt you," he whispered. But her trembling didn't stop, not until she let the truth spill out in uneven fragments. She told him about the tribe she'd been separated from, the betrayals that scattered her family, the weeks she spent wandering town to town only to be turned away like a stray dog. She didn't cry often, but tonight the tears came fast, raw and painful. Eldrick listened, his rough hands resting gently on her blanket-covered shoulder, steadying her without pressing. She glanced up and saw something tremble deep in his eyes, an old pain responding to hers, and she wondered what ghosts walked beside him in the dark. Rumors grew bolder the following day. Town leaders confronted Eldrick outside the saloon, their faces tight with disapproval. "Send her off," one man said. "This town won't tolerate her kind." Eldrick stepped forward, his voice controlled but unyielding as he replied, "She stays." The men exchanged looks, taken aback by the cowboy's resolve, but Eldrick didn't waver. He returned home with a quiet intensity Naira couldn't quite read, and as twilight fell, he knelt before her, not out of dominance but devotion. "Naira," he said softly, "you deserve a life built on dignity. And I want to build mine with you, if you'll let me." Her breath caught, tears rising again, but this time from disbelief, not sorrow. "Would you still want me," she whispered, "if the whole world turned against us?" Eldrick reached for her hand, pressing it to his chest where his heartbeat thudded steadily. "I already do," he murmured, and her world shifted on its axis. The wedding took place the next afternoon at the small prairie chapel, tucked between wild grasses and sunlight that spilled like spilled honey over the land. Eldrick wore a clean dark coat, brushed with care he rarely bothered with. Naira wore a simple white dress offered by Mrs. Hawthorne, the one woman in town whose heart hadn't hardened. The ceremony was quiet, intimate, sincere. Eldrick's vows came out low and steady, each word carrying the weight of a promise forged from loneliness and longing. Naira's voice trembled when she spoke hers, but her eyes never left his, and in them he saw not fear but trust, fragile yet fierce. When they stepped outside as husband and wife, sunlight broke through the gray clouds lingering above, casting the entire prairie in warm gold as if blessing the love that had grown from ruin. Eldrick helped her onto his horse, his hand lingering on her waist, and she leaned into him with a peace she had never known before, wondering how such joy had found her after so much loss. Their return to the cabin felt like stepping into a life newly born. Eldrick guided her to the back porch where the plains stretched endlessly, glowing beneath the descending sun, and he pointed toward a fenced patch of land just beyond the stream. "Thought we'd plant something together," he said. "A beginning that belongs to both of us." Naira felt tears slip down her cheeks, not from sadness now, but from the profound relief of finally belonging somewhere. Eldrick wiped them with the back of his fingers, his touch feather-light, and she leaned into him as the warm breeze wrapped around them like a blessing. They stood at the edge of the porch, his arm around her waist, her head against his shoulder, watching the horizon soften into twilight. In that quiet, their hearts settled into a shared rhythm, steady and sure, as though the universe had always meant for them to meet on that lonely station platform, even when they themselves hadn't believed they deserved such a fate. And if you were standing with them now, watching the sky bruise into purples and golds, you would feel something stir inside you too, a reminder that life often withholds shelter from those who need it most, yet somehow offers the right door when all others remain shut. Maybe it is grace, maybe fate, maybe simply the courage of two souls choosing each other despite the world's disapproval. But the truth lingers gently in the air like a whispered promise. Love grows strongest in the quiet places, in the small acts of mercy, in the choices made when no one else is watching. And if ever you find yourself walking alone into your own dusk, remember their story, because sometimes all it takes is a single voice saying, "Come home with me," to change everything, and the next chapter of your journey may be waiting just beyond the very next horizon.